broken.
For sale, one broken alien, returned 33 times, deemed useless. Her eyes, empty as the desolate Zylos sky, held secrets of unspeakable torment. Whispers of a dark past, a forced silence, and a spirit systematically crushed. No one wanted her, until a lone human dared to look past the scars. What nightmare did she endure that left her a ghost in her own skin? And could one man truly mend a soul shattered beyond repair? Or was he just another fool in a galaxy that had already condemned her? Prepare for a heart-wrenching journey where hope battles trauma, and the price of freedom might be paid in blood. The cacophony of the Scrapyard Alley Market on Zylos was a symphony of chaos. A perpetual twilight clung to the massive, interwoven metal structures that formed the city's underbelly, pierced only by the erratic flicker of neon signs and the searing sparks from distant industrial forges. The air itself was a thick, metallic soup, laced with the acrid tang of burnt oil and something vaguely organic, a pungent alien stew simmering in a street vendor's vat. Traders bellowed prices in a dozen guttural tongues, their voices swallowed by the endless roar of antique machinery and the clatter of salvage being hauled through the grime-slicked thoroughfares. Yet, amidst this unrelenting sensory assault, a stillness existed. Perched on a rusted shipping crate, barely distinguishable from the discarded refuse around her, sat Zylia. Her Lumiana skin, usually a delicate canvas for shifting hues, was a uniform, ash gray, clinging tightly to brittle bones. Her hair, fine tendrils of what should have been glowing light, hung dull and tangled, resembling dusty cobwebs. A broken collar, a remnant of forgotten ownership, dangled limply around her neck. Her eyes, deep wells of obsidian, held no light, no expression, only the hollow emptiness of something utterly depleted. "Returned again," snarled a hulking Kthar merchant, his scaled hide shifting under harsh industrial lights. He slapped a meaty hand on the crate next to Zylia, a laugh rumbling in his chest that sounded like grinding gears. 33rd time. No one wants her. The Lumiana are useless when they break. Crowds of diverse alien species flowed past, a river of bustling life. Some glanced at Zylia with a mix of pity and disdain, others scoffed, a few didn't even register her presence. She was just another piece of unwanted junk in the vast marketplace. To most, she was simply the broken one. A young Glorgan boy, his thick skin mottled green, giggled and tried to poke Zylia with a sharpened piece of scrap. She didn't flinch, didn't stir, not even a blink. Her eyes remained fixed on nothing. The Kthar merchant smacked the boy's hand away with a growl. "Don't damage her, you little snot. I still have to sell her again." Zylia had been bought and returned by countless alien families. Each time, their complaints were the same. She doesn't speak, she's cold. She doesn't follow commands, just stares. Some called her cursed, others useless. All agreed on one thing: she was broken. Across the sprawling, chaotic market, a human figure moved with deliberate slowness. Kaelen Vance was tall, clad in a long, durable coat that seemed to absorb the perpetual grime of Zylos without complaint. A heavy toolbox, worn from countless repairs, hung from his shoulder. He worked with machines, with the intricate, predictable logic of circuitry and hydraulics. He frequented this market for rare parts, components long thought obsolete. But today his gaze snagged on Zylia. He said nothing, simply observed, his face a study in quiet contemplation. The Kthar merchant, ever vigilant, noticed him. "Human, you want her?" he bellowed, a wide, predatory grin stretching across his snout. 10 credits. Cheap, but no returns this time. Absolute final sale. Kaelen remained silent. "She's quiet." The merchant pressed on, misinterpreting Kaelen's silence as hesitation. "Won't give you trouble, but don't expect her to cook or clean. Barely moves. You want her or not?" Still Kaelen offered no reply, but he took a slow step closer. He saw the precise, almost fearful way Zylia sat, hands clasped in her lap, back ramrod straight, as if any movement might shatter her. Her obsidian eyes flickered upward, meeting his for a fleeting fraction of a second, before swiftly dropping. Kaelen reached into his coat and placed a small, dented water bottle on the crate beside her. Zylia didn't react. Not at first. Then, slowly, with agonizing care, she reached out. Her fingers, thin as bone, trembled. She lifted the bottle and took a tiny, hesitant sip, pulling back as if expecting a blow. The merchant chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. See? Pathetic. Kaelen turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling haze of the market. That night, the Scrapyard Alley Market fell into a deceptive quiet. Most traders had packed up, their temporary stalls dismantled and hauled away, leaving behind only scattered refuse and the lingering stench of alien cooking. But the returned goods, the discarded sentient beings, the broken pieces of unwanted life, weren't so lucky. They were locked away in a dark, metallic storage bay 3C, a holding pen behind the main stalls, awaiting their next miserable dawn. Kaelen Vance didn't go home to his core-gray metalworks. Instead, he stayed close, a shadow among the deeper shadows cast by the colossal, rusting structures. He waited, the cold Zylos air seeping into his bones, listening to the metallic groans of the industrial city as it settled into its uneasy slumber. Then he heard it, a soft sound, barely a whisper, broken and ragged, carried on the damp air. It was a lament, a fragile melody of despair. He followed the sound, his steps muted, until he stood before the heavy, scarred door of Storage Bay 3C. Through a narrow, vertical crack in the corroded metal, he saw her. Zylia, curled tightly on the grimy floor, knees drawn to her chest. Her face hidden, she whispered in her Lumiana tone. The words were weak, painful, repeating the same fractured phrases again and again, a litany of sorrow. Kaelen pressed closer, then gently, slowly, eased the heavy door open a fraction. Zylia looked up, her obsidian eyes wide with raw terror. She tried to shrink further into herself, her already frail body trembling violently. Kaelen knelt, slowly, deliberately. He didn't touch her, didn't invade her space, simply sat nearby, a quiet anchor in her storm of fear. She stared at him, her gaze unwavering, expecting pain. He offered no smile, no words. Then, in broken galactic common, a language clearly alien to her, Zylia's voice, raspy from disuse and choked with desperate urgency, finally came. Please, not send me back again. Kaelen's chest tightened. Something deep inside him, something long accustomed to the predictable mechanics of broken machines, shifted profoundly. This wasn't just a discarded item, a unit. This was someone pleading, begging to be seen, to be acknowledged as a living, suffering entity. The next morning, Kaelen returned to the Scrapyard Alley Market before the first vendors even began to stir. A heavy, chemical fog, typical of early Zylos dawns, rested low on the metal ground, and the air smelled of industrial smoke and damp earth. He wasted no time with pleasantries or negotiations. He walked directly to the Kthar merchant, who was already beginning to set up his grim display of broken things, living beings treated no better than scrap metal. I want her, Kaelen stated, his voice devoid of emotion, pointing towards the locked storage bay 3C where Zylia had spent the night. The Kthar's bushy eyebrow arched in surprise. Then he grinned, a predatory flash of teeth. You really want her? He scoffed, a wet chuckle rumbling in his throat. You fix machines, human, not people. She's a lost cause. Kaelen didn't reply. He simply dropped 10 gleaming credits onto the battered table, the metallic clink echoing in the pre-dawn quiet. No returns, the merchant repeated, the grin widening. You'll regret it. They all did. Kaelen ignored him, walking directly to the storage bay. He slid the heavy door open slowly. Zylia was still in the far corner, awake but utterly still, her body curled like a frightened animal anticipating a predator. When her obsidian eyes met his, They didn't widen in shock or fear. They simply stared, waiting for the inevitable pain or disappointment. But Kaelen said nothing. He simply extended his hand, palm open, an unspoken invitation. She stared at it a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a subtle shift, she slowly pushed herself up. Her thin legs trembled, but she moved. She walked out of the dark, metal confines of Storage Bay 3C and followed him, wordlessly, into the gray Zylos dawn. Back at Kaelen's Cordray Metalworks, Zylia stood just inside the main bay, her posture rigid, like she didn't belong, an alien sculpture in a landscape of discarded technology. The space was a symphony of chaos and order. Tools meticulously arranged on pegboards, coils of brightly colored wires cascading from overhead racks, old spacecraft hulls in various states of deconstruction, and the ever-present, comforting scent of oil and warm metal. Kaelen gestured towards a neatly folded, thick blanket in a corner, tucked against a stack of dismantled control panels. "You can rest there," he said, his voice low, steady. Zylia didn't move. Kaelen didn't press her. Instead, he simply returned to his workbench, picking up a broken hover drone, its repulsor lift shattered. Later, he set a bowl of nutrient paste and a glass of purified water on the floor near the blanket. He didn't look at her, didn't cajole. He simply kept working, letting her choose. After many minutes, so many that Kaelen almost believed she wouldn't, she crept forward. She sat beside the bowl, her posture still cautious, not touching it at first. Then, slowly, carefully, she began to eat, tiny, almost imperceptible bites, as if expecting the food to vanish or be snatched away. When she finished, she pulled the thick blanket around her, cocooning herself, and curled up on the floor. Her obsidian eyes remained wide open, tracking the dancing shadows cast by the flickering overhead work lights. Kaelen sat at his workbench and pulled up the digital file the Cathar merchant had handed him. It wasn't long, but it was damning. Her record was a chilling litany of negative descriptors. Non-responsive, emotionally erratic, unable to bond, mute, frightens easily, rejects commands. One note, stark and chilling, stood out. Subject shows signs of deep psychological damage. Possibly defective. Kaelen leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the grimy metal wall of his workshop. This wasn't a broken machine. This was someone who had been systematically broken by others. Over the next few days, Zylia remained silent, a spectral presence in Kaelen's Cordray Metalworks. Yet, her obsidian eyes, though devoid of visible emotion, watched him with an intense, quiet focus. She meticulously studied his movements, the soft, rhythmic click of his tools, the deliberate, patient nature of his repairs. She never touched anything without explicit permission, never made a sound beyond the faint rustle of the blanket as she shifted. At night, she wrapped herself tightly, almost defensively, in the thick fabric, her eyes wide open, tracking the dancing shadows on the walls until Kaelen, tired from his work, finally succumbed to sleep across the room. One overcast afternoon, while Kaelen was meticulously rewiring a damaged communication device, a friend dropped by. It was Sarah Vaughn, an ex-military woman who once served in intergalactic rescue. Her demeanor as sharp and precise as a laser cutter. Her gaze, accustomed to scanning for distress, immediately landed on Zylia, who instinctively recoiled, shrinking back against a stack of discarded power converters at the sound of the stranger's voice. "Who's the girl?" Sarah asked, her tone low, curious. Kaelen answered without looking up from the intricate circuitry. "She was returned too many times. I took her in. Serais beau furod." "From the slave market?" Kaelen gave a curt nod. Sarah observed Zylia carefully, her eyes missing nothing. Then, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of Kaelen's diagnostic tools. "That's not just fear, Kaelen. That's trauma. You can see it in her body language, the way she never turns her back, the way she flinches at any sudden noise, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. They didn't return her because she was defective. They broke her." The words hung in the air, a stark, undeniable truth. That night, As Zylia ate her nutrient paste in quiet solitude, Kaelen sat across from her. "You don't have to speak," he said gently, his voice a soft counterpoint to the distant industrial hum of Zylos. "But you're safe here. I won't send you away." Her hand, midway to her mouth, froze. Her obsidian eyes lifted, staring at him, unsure if she had truly heard him correctly, if such a promise could possibly be real. "You don't have to be useful," Kaelen added, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You don't have to obey. Just stay. That's all." She didn't say anything, didn't offer a single sound. But later, as the dim work lights cast long, dancing shadows and Kaelen prepared for sleep, he noticed a subtle shift. Zylia had moved closer, still on the floor, still wrapped in her blanket, but no longer pressed against the cold, distant wall. It wasn't trust yet, not fully, but it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative step away from the edge. The next morning, Kaelen was deep into rewiring a broken atmospheric scanner when he felt a light, almost imperceptible tug on his sleeve. Zylia stood beside him, a small, intricate tool, its handle snapped clean off, held carefully in her trembling hands. "Fix," she whispered, her voice a soft, rusty sound, and used and fragile, yet undeniably clear. Kaelen took the tool, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. He nodded, a quiet affirmation. "We'll fix it together." He didn't smile, and neither did she. But in the quiet, metallic heart of the core gray metalworks, something began to mend. Not just a broken machine, but something deeper, something vital inside a girl who had been passed around like refuse. And a man who, until now, had always believed machines were simpler, more predictable than people. Perhaps he had been right, until now. The wind outside howled softly through the broken vents of the workshop, carrying the acrid scent of industrial exhaust. But inside, a profound quiet settled. Kaelen sat cross-legged on the grimy floor, small, specialized tools scattered around him. With slow, patient movements, he showed Zylia how to meticulously open a scanner's power port, revealing its intricate inner workings. Zylia sat across from him, her obsidian eyes fixed on his hands, absorbing every detail. She remained silent, yet she copied his movements with an almost surgical precision, her delicate fingers trembling at times. Kaelen didn't correct her, didn't rush her. He let her learn at her own deliberate pace, a silent testament to patience. She was still shy, still unsure, still a ghost in her own skin, but her silence no longer felt like a manifestation of terror. It felt like watching, listening, healing. That night, as a relentless rain lashed against the metal shell of the workshop, Kaelen lit a small, flickering lamp beside Zylia's sleeping spot. He watched as she pulled the blanket closer, instinctively, and for the first time, she turned her back to the door. Before, she had always faced the entrance, perpetually vigilant, always ready to bolt. Now, she was beginning to believe she was truly safe. Kaelen said nothing, his presence a silent sentinel. He simply watched over her until her shallow breathing deepened, her fragile body relaxing into the unfamiliar embrace of sleep. In the early hours of the Zylos morning, long before the industrial hum of the Scrapyard Alley Market fully awakened, Kaelen Vance stirred from his sleep. A small sound had reached him, not the familiar creak of metal or the distant roar of machinery, but a whisper, a tiny, fragile voice. He opened his eyes and saw her. Zylia sat near him, her thin arms wrapped around her drawn-up knees. "Why?" she asked, her voice dry and soft, as if she wasn't certain if it was permissible to even utter such a question. Kaelen sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Why what?" he replied, his tone gentle, unhurried. She looked down at the grimy metal floor, her gaze fixed on a microscopic imperfection. "Why didn't you send me back?" Her words were broken, her galactic common grammar imperfect, but the raw pain and desperate uncertainty behind them were undeniably clear. Kaelen understood then. She had been waiting every single moment for him to grow tired of her too, to discard her like all the others. Kaelen's answer came slowly, but with a quiet, unyielding steadiness. "Because you're not trash," he said, his voice firm. "You're not broken. You just hurt." Zylia looked up, her obsidian eyes wide, reflecting the dim morning light. "Everyone says I don't work," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm no good." Kaelen leaned back against the cool metal wall of his core gray metalworks. "Then they were wrong," he stated simply, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "All of them." She didn't answer right away, lost in thought, biting her bottom lip like a child, trying desperately to appear brave. Then, in a whisper so soft it almost vanished, she asked, "Will you still keep me, even if I don't know how to be good?" Kaelen didn't offer a forced smile, didn't give her empty promises. He simply spoke the words that truly mattered. "Stay with me." The days that followed were quiet, but different. Zylia began waking earlier, her movements less hesitant. She started helping Kaelen with simple tasks, passing him tools, cleaning intricate parts, arranging coils of wire. She still didn't talk much, but her obsidian eyes met his more often, a flicker of nascent connection. She even began to ask questions now and then, whispering soft inquiries like, "This goes here, or is this safe?" Kaelen answered every time, always patient, always calm. One afternoon, while working on a broken cargo drone, Kaelen found her sitting in a corner, a piece of scrap metal in her hands. She had scratched small, hesitant shapes into its surface with a screwdriver. Crude stars, a crescent moon, and a figure with large, protective hands beside a smaller one. Kaelen said nothing. He simply placed a clean, smooth metal plate in front of her, then returned to his work. The next day, he found a new drawing on the fresh plate. Her and him, sitting together under a night sky, the faint glow of distant industrial lights serving as stars. Later that week, while walking through the Scrapyard Alley Market for supplies, Zylia stayed close behind Kaelen, her head lowered, her body a small, defensive curve. People stared. Some whispered. One bulky Glorgan woman even scoffed, her voice a low rumble. "Why keep that one? She's not even pretty. Couldn't you find a better model?" Kaelen didn't respond, but Zylia's steps slowed, her head dropping even lower, her frame shrinking. That night, back at the workshop, she sat silently in her corner, drawing circles over and over on her new pad. When Kaelen gently asked what was wrong, she only said, "I heard them." Kaelen crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. "You don't need to be pretty, or useful, or anything you're not," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I didn't take you in to fix you. I took you in because no one else saw what I did." She looked at him, her obsidian eyes searching his face. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Kaelen paused, considering his words carefully. Then he simply said, "Someone's still alive, still trying. That's enough for me." For the very first time, Zylia smiled. It was small, a fragile curve of her lips, as if she wasn't sure if it was permissible to be happy. But it was real. That night, as the rain returned to Zylos and thunder shook the very foundations of the workshop, Zylia didn't hide in her corner as she usually did. She came and sat beside Kaelen as he worked, curling up with her blanket near his feet. Her eyes didn't dart around in fear. She simply rested, trusting the quiet warmth beside her. And Kaelen, for the first time in years, felt like he wasn't just fixing machines anymore. He was mending something no tool could ever reach, something profound inside both of them. Rain still poured outside the core gray metalworks, a relentless drumming on the metal roof, as if the very sky of Zylos mourned some forgotten sorrow. But inside, the air was still quiet. Zylia sat near the workbench, her eyes fixed on a piece of scrap metal. She held a small piece of wire like a drawing tool, her delicate fingers moving with an intent focus as she sketched. Kaelen watched her from across the room, tightening bolts on a newly repaired power conduit. He had noticed something unsettling these past few days. Her drawings had changed. They weren't stars or simple shapes anymore. They were darker, shadows, intricate chains, small, cramped cages, chilling symbols of pain. One image depicted a small Lumiana girl with her mouth sewn shut. Another showed tiny hands bound tightly to the ceiling. Kaelen didn't need words to understand. These weren't mere drawings. They were memories. Later that night, after Zylia had finally succumbed to a restless sleep, Kaelen quietly picked up a few of the unsettling sketches she had left behind. He didn't ask her permission, but he knew she wouldn't stop him. She wanted someone to see, someone to understand. He took the drawings to Serafina Vaughn. Sarah, his ex-military friend, had spent years on recovery missions for victims of alien trafficking. When she saw the images, her face, usually so composed, grew pale. "These aren't nightmares, Kaelen," she said softly, her voice hushed. "These are signs of deep, systemic trauma. This girl wasn't just passed around. She was broken on purpose, probably by those who deal in high-dollar servants. I've seen this specific kind of psychological conditioning before." Kaelen felt a cold sickness churn in his stomach. Zylia had never told him anything about her past, but she didn't have to. Every scar on her soul was already etched on paper, scratched in silence with trembling fingers. Sarah looked at him, her gaze serious, almost grim. "She's lucky she found you, Kaelen. If those bastards find out she's still alive, and worse, doing better, they might want her back. Or worse, try to cover their tracks." Kaelen's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. They'll never touch her again. Back at the core gray metalworks, Zylia sat on the floor, her legs pulled to her chest, a small, vulnerable bundle. She looked up when Kaelen entered, her obsidian eyes silently asking questions her mouth couldn't form. He sat beside her and handed her a small, neatly wrapped package. Inside, nestled in soft packing material, was a real sketch pad and a clean set of drawing tools. Zylia touched them, her fingers tracing the smooth paper and cool metal like they were made of pure starlight. "You can draw whatever you want," Kaelen said gently, his voice a quiet promise. "I'll look at every page." Zylia didn't smile, but her eyes softened in a way that spoke volumes, a tiny flicker of light in their depths. That night, as they ate in quiet peace, a sudden, harsh noise outside made Zylia freeze. It was a metallic thump, unmistakable, like heavy boots on the industrial gratings of the alleyway. She grabbed her blanket, backing instinctively into the corner of the room, her eyes wide with panic, her breathing coming in fast, shallow gasps. Kaelen stood and went to the grimy window. Two tall, imposing alien figures were walking down the alley. One of them, a bulky, armored being, was looking directly at his workshop. The other held a tablet, its screen glowing faintly as it scanned the area. Kaelen felt a cold dread settle in his chest. He knew those uniforms. They weren't peacekeepers. They were private enforcers hired by powerful traders to recover lost property. And Zylia had once been one of those items. He turned back to her. "Zylia," he said, his voice calm, but firm with an underlying steel. "Do you know them?" She nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "Did they put me in the dark box with wires?" Kaelen's fists clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "Then we won't let them take you." He pulled the heavy, grimy curtain closed, plunged the workshop into near darkness, and motioned for her to follow. They moved quickly to the back of the workshop, where a hidden panel, cleverly concealed, led to a narrow, cold storage tunnel. It was dark and damp, but for now it was safe. In the suffocating darkness of the tunnel, Zylia whispered, her voice barely audible, "I can leave, if it keeps you safe." Kaelen turned to her sharply, his voice low but fierce. "No." His gaze burned with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "You don't run alone again. I told you to stay. That means with me. No matter what." Zylia looked as though she wanted to cry, but no tears came. Her well of tears had dried up long ago. Instead, she simply reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they intertwined with his, holding on as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded in the world. They waited in silence, huddled together in the cold, until the harsh sounds above them faded, swallowed by the vast, indifferent city. When it was finally safe to return, Zylia didn't ask what would happen next. She just followed Kaelen back to the faint glow of the workshop's emergency lights. That night, as Kaelen sat by his workbench, Zylia brought him another drawing. This one was different. It depicted her, a small Lumiana girl, standing beside a tall human man with tools in his belt. The stars above them, though rendered crudely, looked calm, peaceful. And beneath the drawing, in shaky, uneven letters, she had written 4 words, her first full sentence. You said, "Stay with me." And now, she truly wanted to. The next morning, an unsettling quiet hung over the Scrapyard Alley Market. Kaelen felt at the moment he opened the massive metal door to his core gray metalworks. The air was thick, heavy, as if something unseen waited nearby, holding its breath. He scanned both ways down the alley before stepping outside, his gaze sharp, assessing the usual morning bustle. Zylia stayed hidden inside, watching through a narrow crack between the metal panels. She felt it too, that strange pressure, an old fear crawling up her spine once more. Kaelen didn't need to speak. His eyes, his slow, deliberate steps, communicated the unspoken truth. Something was coming. He went to the market as usual to pick up parts, but the vendors seemed tense. Some avoided his gaze. Others whispered furtively behind their rickety stalls. One grizzled Zylos vendor, usually quick with a sarcastic remark, leaned close, his voice a low rasp. 2 men, asking questions about you yesterday. So they were looking for a runaway item. Paid good credits for info. Kaelen offered no reply, just a curt nod, and turned back toward his workshop, his pace quicker than before. When he returned, Zylia was already waiting by the door, her small frame rigid. She didn't ask anything. She just looked at his face, and she knew. Her fingers instinctively curled around the drawing pad. She now kept close, almost like a shield. Kaelen didn't want to frighten her, but there was no more time for silence. "They'll come again," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We have to be ready." But being ready didn't matter, because they came sooner than expected. That same evening, as the perpetual dusk of Zylos began to settle, a loud, authoritative knock echoed against the workshop's heavy metal door. Then a voice, cold and official, reverberated through the grimy alley. "By order of the Intergalactic Trade Registry, we demand entry to verify ownership of stolen property." Zylia backed away instantly, trembling, her hands gripping the metal wall behind her, as if she were trying to melt into it. Kaelen positioned himself between her and the door. "She's not property," he called out, his voice calm but firm. The door slid open halfway, revealing 2 tall, armored aliens in black, their faces hidden behind dark metal visors. Kaelen swiftly slammed the safety lock back into place, sealing them out for a moment. One of the officers held a tablet, its screen glowing with data as it scanned the interior of the workshop. "You are in possession of a registered Class D labor unit," the officer stated, his voice a synthesized monotone. "Subject ID, Zylia, 47. Multiple returns. You're not authorized to keep her." "She's not a thing," Kaelen replied, his voice unyielding. "She's a person. She stays with me." "She has no legal rights," the officer retorted, taking a step forward. "She belongs to her original owner, who has requested retrieval." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "She was tortured, abused. You're not taking her back." Zylia crouched low behind a storage unit, her breath coming in fast, ragged gasps. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. Her body refused to move, frozen by the screaming memories inside her, pulling her backward into unseen cages and chains. Her voice, so recently returned, wouldn't come. The second officer stepped forward, his armored gauntlet resting on a stun gun. "If you don't comply, human, we will use force." But then something shifted. Zylia, still shaking, rose slowly from behind the crates. Her bare feet made soft, almost imperceptible sounds on the metal floor. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She stepped out, coming to stand beside Kaelen, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around the edge of his worn coat. "She is not yours," Kaelen repeated, his gaze unwavering, not looking away from the menacing visors. And then Zylia did something no one, not even Kaelen, expected. She spoke. "I choose to stay." Her voice was small, broken, but undeniably clear, cutting through the tense air like a shard of ice. The officers paused. "She's not a legal citizen," one of them snapped, recovering quickly. "But I am," Kaelen answered, his tone now like honed steel. "And I'm filing for immediate asylum protection under galactic humanitarian law." The officers scowled behind their visors. "That's not how this works." Kaelen stepped forward, his presence radiating an unyielding resolve. "I've already sent her testimony to Intergalactic Human Rights Command. I have witnesses, medical scans, visual reports of abuse drawn by the subject herself. You walk out now, or you'll be the ones charged." The two enforcers exchanged a swift, silent look. Then, without another word, they turned and vanished into the shadows of the alley. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind them, locking with a final, deep thud. Inside the workshop, silence returned, thick and heavy. Zylia slowly slid down to the floor, her hands shaking too much to hold the drawing pad. Kaelen knelt beside her. "You were brave," he said quietly, his voice filled with a profound respect. She shook her head, a faint tremor running through her. "No, I was just tired of being afraid." Kaelen didn't hug her. He didn't speak more. He simply sat with her on the cold floor, his presence a silent comfort, until her breathing slowly calmed and the panic began to recede. That night, she didn't sleep in the corner. She slept on the cot he had placed beside the workbench weeks ago, a cot she had never dared to use until now. Because now, she had chosen to stay. 3 days later, the sky above the Zylos Alliance Hall of Justice was a uniform, oppressive gray, mirroring the stark, imposing structure itself. It was a monolith of dark stone and unforgiving metal, all straight lines and sharp angles, devoid of any warmth. Zylia sat in a small, sterile waiting room beside Kaelen, her hands tightly wrapped around a cup of warm, unflavored nutrient broth she hadn't touched. Her shoulders were stiff, her Lumiana skin a pale, anxious gray. She hadn't drawn in 2 days. She hadn't smiled either. This place, with its tall walls, locked doors, and the hushed, impersonal voices of officials, reminded her too much of the dark boxes she had come from. People here talked about her in hushed tones, as if she wasn't truly present. But this time, she wasn't alone. Kaelen was beside her, his worn coat draped gently around her shoulders, his gaze fixed on the heavy door ahead. This time, she wasn't going back without a fight. A court officer, a severe-looking alien with gleaming cybernetic implants, stepped into the room. "The hearing is ready," he stated, his voice flat. Kaelen stood and gently offered his hand. Zylia looked at it for a second, her obsidian eyes filled with a fragile uncertainty. Then, slowly she took it. Her fingers were cold, her steps hesitant, but she walked beside him, not behind him, not dragged along. She walked as an equal. Inside the vast chamber, alien judges sat high on a raised platform, their faces inscrutable, obscured by the solemnity of their robes and the dim, focused lighting. Officials from the Intergalactic Trade Registry stood at the opposite side of the room, dressed in immaculate, stiff uniforms, clutching digital pads filled with cold, impersonal records. One of them, a lean, arrogant Zylos, spoke first, his voice resonating with calculated disdain. "Subject Zylia 47 is a Class D domestic labor unit, legally returned by 31 previous buyers due to unsuitability. Subject was recently taken from market custody by this human without registry approval. We request she be returned to her rightful owner or processed for repurposing." Kaelen stood calmly, his presence unwavering. "She's not an object. She's a living being. She was not unsuitable. She was abused. I have statements from witnesses, medical scans showing trauma injuries, and artwork drawn by the subject that clearly depicts memories of torture." The trade officer sneered, a sound that carried clearly in the silent chamber. "She doesn't speak properly. Her testimony cannot be trusted. She has no registered citizenship, no family, no worth." Zylia's hands trembled beneath the table, clutching Kaelen's. She desperately wanted to disappear, to vanish into the shadows. She had heard these words all her life. No worth, no voice, no right to choose. But Kaelen didn't back down. "She has me," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. "I'm applying for full guardianship and requesting humanitarian protection. She lives with me now, not as property, but as family." A palpable silence fell over the chamber. The judges whispered among themselves, their voices low and indistinct. One of them, an elder Lumiana with a wise, ancient face, looked directly at Zylia. "Can she speak for herself?" Zylia's heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. Her mouth felt impossibly dry. She looked down at her hands, then up at Kaelen. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No pressure, no command, just quiet, unwavering support. She looked back at the judges, then slowly, painstakingly, stood. Her legs felt weak. Her voice was even weaker, but she stood straight, her small frame defiant, and looked up at the towering figures. "My name is Zylia," she began slowly, each word a monumental effort, a rusty hinge creaking open. "I was soul hurt, passed like broken box." Her words were rough, her sentences fragmented, but every syllable was real, raw truth. "He gave me food warm. He didn't touch me wrong. Didn't shout. He say, 'Stay with me.' And I stay. I choose. I am not thing." One of the trade officers chuckled lightly, a dismissive sound. "She's confused. Emotional tricks." But the elder Lumiana judge raised a hand, silencing him immediately. He then turned his gaze back to Kaelen. "You are willing to provide shelter, emotional care, education, and medical support?" "I already have," Kaelen stated, his voice ringing with conviction. "And I'll keep doing it." After a long, pregnant silence, the senior judge leaned forward. "Effective immediately, Subject Zylia 47 is granted protected status under Intergalactic Humanitarian Code. The court recognizes her as an autonomous being under temporary guardianship of Kaelen Vance, human citizen." Zylia blinked. She didn't understand all the complex legal words, but when Kaelen turned to her, his tired eyes filled with a gentle warmth, and whispered, "You're free," she knew exactly what it meant. She covered her mouth with her hands, a silent gasp. Tears didn't come right away. She had forgotten how to cry. But her chest felt light, impossibly light, as if a heavy cage had suddenly shattered. Her fingers gripped Kaelen's sleeve tightly, not in fear, but in pure, overwhelming relief. As they left the grand, imposing Zylos Alliance Hall of Justice, the cold, biting wind no longer felt so harsh. Zylia looked up at the perpetually cloudy, gray sky. "What now?" she asked softly, her voice still fragile, but carrying a newfound lightness. Kaelen looked at her with calm, unwavering eyes. "Now we go home." That word felt strange on her tongue, home. She had never truly had one before, but now perhaps she did. That night, back at the Core-Grain Metalworks, Zylia drew something new. Not cages, not chains, not the shadowy figures of her pain. She drew a small, warm room, a workbench covered with tools, a tall man with tired, kind eyes and a soft, comforting coat, and a girl sitting beside him. Not scared, not broken, just alive. At the bottom of the page, in clean, steady letters, she wrote her first full sentence. "I choose to stay." Weeks passed quietly after the court's decision. The relentless cold season of Zylos began to fade, and soft, pale sunlight, filtering through the perpetual industrial haze, started slipping through the workshop windows again. Dust motes danced in the golden rays, like tiny, ephemeral spirits, as Kaelen's machines hummed gently in the background. It was peaceful, the kind of profound peace Zylia never knew existed. Each morning, she woke to the familiar, comforting sound of metal tools clinking and the faint, appetizing smell of fresh-baked nutrient bread Kaelen picked up from a nearby vendor. Each evening, she helped organize wires, handed him tools, or simply sat near him while he worked. She rarely spoke, but she didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable now, a language of shared understanding, safe and warm. One day, Kaelen found her humming. It was just a soft sound, barely a whisper, a nascent melody. She was meticulously cleaning a cracked engine casing, completely unaware she was doing it. When she noticed him listening, she froze, her Lumiana skin flushing a faint, embarrassed gray. But Kaelen didn't say a word. He simply returned to his task, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. That was his way of telling her it was okay. She had even started to laugh sometimes too. Not loudly, not often, but it came especially when Kaelen dropped a wrench or mumbled at a stubborn, broken part as if it could hear his exasperation. She still jumped at sudden, unexpected noises and meticulously avoided mirrors, remnants of the trauma clinging to her. She still slept with the blanket tucked tightly around her like armor, but she didn't hide anymore. She didn't stare at the workshop door, perpetually vigilant, like someone was coming to take her away. The question had vanished from her obsidian eyes. Will you send me back? One quiet afternoon, while dusting old, forgotten parts in a forgotten corner, she found a small, broken drone. It was shaped like a bird, its delicate wings cracked, and its optical sensors dim. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a little stronger now, less rusty. Kaelen looked up from across the room. That used to fly," he said softly, a hint of nostalgia in his tone. "It was the first thing I ever fixed when I came here. But one day it just stopped working. I never had time to fix it again." Zylia sat down with the drone. She turned it over gently in her hands, studying its intricate, damaged components. Then, with newfound confidence, she carefully opened its access panel and began reconnecting wires. Her fingers weren't shaking like they once had. Kaelen didn't help. He just watched from his bench, letting her try, letting her discover her own capability. It took hours. She didn't stop once, lost in the intricate puzzle of the broken machine. By the time she was done, the Zylos sun had begun its slow descent, painting the hazy sky in muted oranges and purples. She tapped the tiny activation button under the bird's wing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, softly, tentatively, the miniature wings fluttered. The bird's optical sensors blinked. It lifted off the table in a slow, awkward hover, spinning once in the air, a tiny miracle. Zylia gasped, a sound of pure wonder. It wasn't perfect, but it flew. Kaelen stood behind her, resting a hand gently on her shoulder, a rare, comforting touch. "You brought it back," he said, his voice laced with quiet awe. She looked up at him, her obsidian eyes wide, reflecting the tiny, hovering drone. "Like you did to me," she whispered, her voice gaining strength and clarity. "You found me in pieces." Kaelen didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "You were never broken, Zylia. Just hurt. Like the drone. The pieces were still there. They just needed someone to care enough to put them back together." Zylia turned back to the flying bird, her face calm, illuminated by the faint glow of the drone. "Then I want to fix things too," she said, her voice firm with a newfound purpose. "Not just machines. People someday." Kaelen nodded, a silent affirmation. "You will." Later that night, they sat under the muted stars on the roof of the workshop, the vast, industrial cityscape stretching out beneath them. Zylia pulled her knees up, resting her head on them, looking up at the immense, open sky, no longer threatening, but full of possibilities. "There was a time I thought I'd die in a dark box," she said, her voice quiet, reflective. "Forgotten. Worthless. But now," she looked at Kaelen, her eyes meeting his directly, "now I draw stars instead of cages." Kaelen looked at her with quiet pride, a profound satisfaction in his gaze. "And every star is your own now." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle, metallic hum of the Zylos night wind. The little drone bird hovered nearby, spinning in slow, graceful circles, like it was dancing a silent celebration. And then Zylia said something that surprised them both, a statement of profound acceptance. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Kaelen shook his head, his gaze softening. "You never gave up on yourself, Zylia. You just needed a place to heal." She smiled then, a real one this time, bright, soft, and utterly full of life. "Then I'll stay here," she said, her voice clear and strong, filled not with fear or obligation, but with a quiet joy. "Not because I have to, not because I'm scared, but because I choose to." Kaelen looked at her with quiet warmth, a silent promise in his eyes. Then, welcome home. And for the first time in her life, the word home didn't sound like a distant dream or a cruel lie. It felt real, because she was no longer someone forgotten, no longer someone returned unwanted. She was someone who stayed.